a dinosaur in a floating coffin. Those were the words my own first mate Marco used to gut me right there on the Gloucester State Fish Pier. He was younger, ambitious, and stood there with my entire crew behind him, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. I can still see the smug satisfaction in his eyes as the other captains looked on, their laughter echoing off the water. He was the future, and I was just a relic from the past, left with nothing but my grandfather's rust bucket boat. Desperate and alone, I pushed the Folly's End out into the unforgiving North Atlantic, straight into a brewing squall. That's when I saw it, bobbing in the violent gray waves, a heavy steel barrel, crusted with salt and marked with a faded insignia I'd never seen before. It seemed to defy the storm, a dark secret the sea was trying to offer up. Would you have had the courage to pull it from the water? Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what I found inside changed everything. My name is Silas Croft. I'm 48 years old, and for every single one of those years, the salt of the North Atlantic has been in my blood. It's a legacy, you see. My grandfather, Old Finn Croft, he built the Folly's End with his own two hands. He taught my father how to read the currents, how to smell a storm on the wind, and how to find the cod when the banks were supposedly fished out. And my father, he taught me, this boat, this life, it's all I've ever known. It's not a glamorous life, it's calloused hands, the permanent ache in your lower back, the smell of diesel and brine that you can never quite wash out of your clothes. But it was an honest life. It was my life. Or it was, until the world decided men like me were obsolete. The constant, grinding reminder of that fact had a name: Arthur Sterling. He owned Sterling Seafoods, the biggest buyer on the Gloucester Pier. Sterling was a man whose hands had never touched a gaff hook, whose worst weather was a light drizzle on his way from his heated garage to the front door of his waterfront mansion. He wore tailored suits that probably cost more than my boat's engine, and he looked at fishermen like me the way you'd look at a piece of driftwood, something the tide washed in, insignificant and easily discarded. For years he was the architect of my quiet humiliation. I'd bring the Folly's End in, her hull groaning, the fish hold full after 3 days of fighting the sea, and Sterling would be there on the dock, a clipboard in his hand and a permanent sneer on his face. I remember one time I'd landed a beautiful haul of haddock, prime silver-scaled fish. I was proud. I thought, this is it. This is the trip that gets me ahead. Sterling walked over, his polished shoes clicking on the wet wood of the pier. He didn't even look at the fish first. He looked at my boat. He let his eyes wander over the rust streaks that looked like weeping sores on the hull, the patched-up nets, the worn-out lines. Then he sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound. "Silas," he said, loud enough for the crews on the neighboring high-tech trawlers to hear. "Still flogging this old horse? I'm surprised she hasn't sunk at the dock." The laughter was immediate. It wasn't cruel, not exactly. It was worse. It was pitying. He then glanced into my hold, poked one of the perfect fish with the toe of his shoe, and said, "I'll give you 60 cents a pound. Frankly, I'm doing you a favor. The quality isn't what it used to be." Right next to me, a brand new boat, all fiberglass and chrome, was getting $2 a pound. The quality wasn't the issue. The man was. I was being punished for being poor, for honoring my grandfather's legacy instead of trading it in for a mountain of debt and a computerized fish finder. These small cuts happened every week. In the Crow's Nest, the local bar, he'd buy a round for everyone but me, making a grand show of it. "A toast," he'd bellow, "to the fishermen who are actually feeding this town." Then he'd catch my eye and give me a little wink, as if we were sharing a private joke. But the joke was always me. The worst part was watching my own crew, young guys, like Marco. They'd laugh along with Sterling. They'd accept his free drinks. I could see the seed of disrespect he was planting in them. They started looking at me the same way he did, not as a captain, but as a relic, a failure. The public walkout, when Marco stood on that pier and called my birthright a floating coffin, that wasn't the beginning of my humiliation. It was the grand finale of a death by 1,000 cuts, all orchestrated by men like Sterling who value money more than heritage, more than soul. So there I was, alone. My crew was gone. The laughter of the other captains was still ringing in my ears, and Sterling was watching from his office window, probably calculating how cheaply he could buy my boat for scrap. I had two choices: let the Folly's End rot at the pier and admit they were all right, or go out and prove them wrong. It wasn't a choice, really. It was a reflex. I untied the lines, the thick rope course in my hands, and pushed her out into the harbor. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a crew. All I had was a broken heart and a fuel tank that was half full. The sky was turning a bruised purple gray, the wind picking up, spitting rain. A squall was brewing, and any sane fisherman would have been heading in, not out. But I wasn't sane. I was a ghost, haunting the deck of my own ship, heading out into a sea that felt as angry and turbulent as my own soul. I was maybe 10 miles out. The waves were getting ugly, slapping against the hull with a force that made the whole boat shudder. I was just trying to keep her nose pointed into the swell, my knuckles white on the wheel, when I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker of something out of place, a patch of darkness in the churning gray that didn't move right. The sea has a rhythm, even in a storm, but this thing, it was stubborn. It rose and fell on the waves, but it seemed to fight the current, to hold its position with an unnatural stillness. I thought it was a dead whale, maybe a submerged container that had fallen off a freighter. Common enough, but the closer I got, the less sense it made. It wasn't large enough to be a container, and it had a strange, uniform shape. A glint of something, not metal, not water, reflected the dim, stormy light. It was just a dark object, bobbing in the violent sea, a question mark in the middle of nowhere. Every instinct told me to stay clear, to focus on surviving the storm, but I couldn't look away. It was pulling me in, a dark secret the ocean itself was trying to show me. The wind was howling, the waves were trying to swallow my little boat whole. Every bit of seamanship my grandfather taught me screamed to turn back, but another part of me, the part that had just been kicked into the dirt, saw a chance. A mystery. What would you have done? Would you have risked it all for a secret the ocean was trying to hand you? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe, because the decision I made in that moment, well, it set a course I could never turn back from. The rational part of my brain, the part that my father had painstakingly trained in the art of survival, was screaming at me. It was a simple equation of risk versus reward. The risk was my life, my boat, everything. The reward, unknown. Probably nothing. A piece of sea junk, a navigational hazard to be avoided at all costs. Any other day, I would have listened to that voice. I would have cursed the thing for being in my way and steered the Folly's End as far from it as possible. But that day, the voice of reason was drowned out by the echoes of laughter from the pier. It was drowned out by the image of Marco, my protege, standing there with my life's work behind him, calling my legacy a coffin. It was drowned out by the memory of Arthur Sterling's polished shoes and his smug, dismissive sneer. What did I have to lose that they hadn't already taken? My pride was gone. My crew was gone. My reputation was a joke. All I had left was this old boat and a half-tank of fuel. In that moment, turning away from that mysterious barrel felt exactly like turning away from the only chance I might ever get to prove them all wrong. My curiosity wasn't just stronger than my fear. It was fueled by a rage I hadn't realized was simmering just beneath the surface. I turned the wheel, the old wood groaning under my hands, and pointed the bow of the Folly's End, straight at the heart of the mystery. Getting close was a nightmare. In a storm like this, with a proper crew, it would have been a dangerous four-man job. Alone, it was borderline suicidal. The waves weren't rolling. They were standing up and punching, chaotic and unpredictable. I had to time each swell, pushing the throttle just enough to gain ground without letting a rogue wave slam me sideways into the thing. I lashed the wheel, ran to the rail with a gaff hook, the deck slick with rain and spray, my boots slipping with every lurch of the boat. The barrel would appear on the crest of a wave, hanging there for a second, impossibly close, then vanish into a trough, hidden by a wall of gray water. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. I was completely exposed, a lone man on a tiny boat fighting a giant. On my third pass, I got my chance. A wave lifted the barrel right alongside me, almost level with the deck. I leaned out, my muscles screaming in protest, and swung the gaff. The hook caught. The jolt nearly tore my arm from its socket. I felt the weight of it, a solid, dead weight that had no business being so buoyant. It wasn't just floating, it was fighting me, the current pulling it one way while I pulled the other. The Folly's End listed hard, the rail dipping dangerously close to the churning water. For a terrifying second, I thought the barrel was going to pull my boat under. I had one shot at this. I didn't have the crew to operate the main boom winch, so it had to be old-fashioned muscle and mechanics. I scrambled to set up a small block and tackle I kept for emergencies, my fingers clumsy and numb with cold. I managed to loop a heavy rope around the barrel, the metal cold and slick beneath my gloves. Then the real work began. Pulling. It was like trying to haul a piece of the ocean floor onto my deck. Every time I gained a few inches, a wave would smack against the hull, and I'd lose it, the rope burning through my gloves as I fought to hold on. The barrel was a battering ram, slamming against the side of the Folly's end, each impact a sickening crunch of metal on wood. I could hear the groans of my grandfather's boat, and I prayed the hull would hold. Sweat and salt water blinded me. My back felt like it was going to split in two. I was running on nothing but adrenaline and spite. I pictured Sterling's face, Marco's betrayal. With every pull, I wasn't just lifting a barrel. I was lifting myself out of the hole they'd thrown me in. Then, disaster. As I was giving one last desperate heave, my foot slipped on a patch of diesel-slicked deck. I went down hard. The rope shot through my hands, and the barrel, which had been halfway over the rail, plunged back into the sea. The line went taut, and the recoil whipped the rope around my ankle. I felt a horrifying tug, dragging me toward the edge of the boat. The cold black water was reaching for me. This was it. This is how it ends. A fool alone in a storm, dragged to his death by a piece of junk. The ultimate punchline to the joke my life had become. But as I saw the water rush up to meet me, something snapped. It wasn't over. I refused to let it be over. With a roar that was torn from my throat by the wind, I kicked my other leg free, grabbed the knife from my belt, and slashed at the line wrapped around my ankle, freeing myself just as my boots went over the side. I scrambled back, my chest heaving, my body screaming. The barrel was still there, tethered by the block and tackle, a stubborn monster refusing to be tamed. I wasn't just curious anymore. I was at war with this thing. I got to my feet, my legs shaking, and grabbed the rope again. This time, there was no finesse. It was just pure, primal rage. I pulled until I saw stars, until the muscles in my arms felt like they were ripping apart. And then with a final deafening crash, it was on the deck. It rolled a few feet and slammed against the far rail, finally still. I collapsed beside it, my lungs on fire, the rain washing over me, unable to move. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, I pushed myself up. I was bruised, bleeding, and utterly exhausted. But I was alive, and it was here, on my deck. It was a heavy steel drum, bigger than a standard oil barrel, sealed with thick, rusted clamps. It looked military, but the faded insignia stenciled on its side, a serpent eating its own tail around a stylized compass rose, was like nothing I'd ever seen from any navy or shipping line. It was ancient, alien. It radiated a sense of importance, of danger. It was a time capsule, a secret chest, a Pandora's box offered up by the storm. I stood there, alone on my battered boat in the middle of a raging sea, staring at this impossible object that had nearly killed me. My mind raced. What could be inside? Weapons? Contraband? Something else entirely? The sheer weight of it, the way it was sealed. Whatever it held was meant to stay hidden forever. Every instinct of self-preservation told me to push it back over the side and forget I ever saw it. But my life as I knew it was already over. This was something new. This was a choice. My choice. I put my hand on the cold, wet metal, a strange tremor running through me. It felt like I was touching destiny itself. Would you have had the courage to pull it from the water? Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what I found inside changed everything. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving behind a sky washed clean and gray, and a sea that still heaved with exhaustion. I didn't head back to Gloucester, not yet. I piloted the Folly's End to a place my grandfather had shown me when I was a boy, a tiny, hidden cove on the backside of Thatcher Island, shielded from view by a curtain of jagged rock. It was our secret spot, a place to ride out a blow or just get away from the world. Now, it was going to be the place where my world either ended or began anew. The barrel sat lashed to the deck, a silent, dark monolith. It seemed to hum with a strange energy, a potential that was both terrifying and intoxicating. I was running on fumes, my body a symphony of aches and bruises, but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. I had to know. I found my grandfather's old toolbox, the metal of it cold and damp. The clamps on the barrel were thick, industrial, and rusted solid by years in the salt. A hammer and chisel did nothing but chip away flakes of rust. I needed leverage. I wedged the end of a long crowbar under the lip of the main seal, put my entire weight on it, my boots slipping on the wet deck. The metal groaned, a high-pitched, protesting shriek that set my teeth on edge. Nothing. I repositioned it, found a better angle, and threw myself against it again. This time, there was a sharp crack, like a gunshot echoing off the rocks of the cove. The seal had broken. The air that hissed out was stale, ancient, smelling of rubber and something else, something sterile, like old paper. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I pried the heavy lid open, the metal screeching in protest until it was finally free. I peered inside. There was no gold, no jewels, no pirate treasure. My first reaction was a wave of bitter disappointment. Inside, nestled in custom-fit foam padding, were dozens of black rectangular packages. They were vacuum-sealed in a thick rubberized material, the kind you might see on a military raft. They looked heavy, dense. I lifted one out. It probably weighed 5 or 6 pounds. There were no markings, no labels, nothing to indicate what they were. For a moment I thought it was contraband, drugs maybe. The thought turned my stomach. Was this the devil's bargain the sea had offered me? Trading one kind of ruin for another? I almost slammed the lid shut right then and there, but I had to know. I took the bait knife from my belt, its edge still sharp, and carefully sliced open the corner of the first package. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't see powder or bricks of narcotics. I saw a face, Benjamin Franklin's face, printed on crisp, clean paper. It was a stack of $100 bills. I pulled the stack out, my hand trembling so badly I could barely hold it. They weren't just new, they were pristine, uncirculated. The paper was stiff, the ink so fresh I could almost smell it. I fanned through them. They weren't sequential, which meant they weren't fresh from the mint. This was used money, but money that had been kept in perfect condition. I stumbled back, landing hard against the rail, the stack of bills clutched in my hand like a holy relic. I looked from the money to the barrel, filled with dozens more identical black packages. It wasn't possible. It was a dream. It had to be. My mind, the practical fisherman's mind that was used to calculating fuel costs and the price of bait, kicked into gear. I had to quantify it. I had to make it real. I sat down on the deck, the package in my lap, and I counted. I counted one of the smaller stacks within the package, $10,000. There were 10 such stacks in that one package. $100,000 in one rubberized brick. I did a rough count of the packages still in the barrel. There had to be at least 300 of them. My hands were shaking. I did the math once, then twice. The number my brain landed on was so absurd I laughed out loud, a harsh, broken sound that scared the gulls off the nearby rocks. 300 packages, times $100,000 each. No, that couldn't be right. I recounted, my mind racing, heart pounding. The number was closer to 30 million, still an impossible fortune. But then I looked closer at the packages. Some were much thicker, double the size of the first one. I opened one of the larger ones. It held 200,000. I did the math again, my throat dry, my vision swimming. The real number, the final, terrifying, unbelievable number, was somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million. $300 million, sitting in a rusty barrel on the deck of a boat called the Folly's End. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. At the very bottom of the barrel, beneath the last package, was a single object wrapped in oilcloth. I unwrapped it. It was a gold coin, heavy and solid in my palm. It was minted with that same strange symbol from the outside of the barrel, the serpent eating its own tail, coiled around a compass rose. It felt ancient, a key to a lock I didn't understand. The trip back to Gloucester was different. The sea was calm, but a new storm was raging inside me. I was no longer a ghost in my own skin. I was a man with a nuclear secret in the hull of a fishing boat. I docked the Folly's End in her usual spot, the laughter from the other day still a faint echo in the air. I had a small catch of pollock from before the storm, not even enough to cover fuel, but I had to act normal. I saw Arthur Sterling standing on the pier, looking as immaculate as ever. He saw me and his lip curled into that familiar sneer. "Well, well," he called out. "The ghost ship returns. Find any treasure out there, Silas?" His laughter was condescending. The old me would have flinched, would have mumbled something and accepted whatever garbage price he offered. But the old me was gone. I looked him dead in the eye, a strange calm settling over me. I held his gaze until his smile faltered. "Just a few fish, Arthur," I said, my voice even. He offered me 40 cents a pound. I just shook my head. "No, thank you, Arthur. I think I'll hold on to it." The look on his face, utter, baffled confusion, was more satisfying than $1 million. Though at that moment, I had 300 times that. Later, I saw Marco. He was on the deck of his new boat, the Tidal Force, all gleaming white fiberglass and chrome. He was laughing with his new crew. He saw me and gave me a wave, not of friendship, but of pity, the kind of wave you give a stray dog. I just nodded back. He saw a broken-down man on a floating coffin. I saw a man who didn't understand that the entire game had just changed, forever. The money wasn't a solution. It was a new, terrifying problem. Was this a cartel payroll that went missing in the storm? A ghost payment from some Cold War spy agency, lost for decades? Or was it something else, tied to that strange coin, a treasure far older and more mysterious than I could ever imagine? The weight of it was suffocating. I had the power to buy this entire pier, to crush men like Sterling and Marco without a second thought. But if I made one wrong move, the real owners of that money would come looking for it, and I had a feeling they wouldn't be as polite as Arthur Sterling. I had a choice to make, a choice that would define not just my future, but my very soul. What would you do if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments and subscribe, because you won't believe the path I chose next. The first step was the hardest. A mountain of cash is worthless if you can't use it. Walking into a Gloucester bank with even one of those vacuum-sealed bricks would have landed me in a federal holding cell before lunchtime. The money was a ghost, and I needed a way to make it real. The key, I knew, was the coin. It felt different from the cash, not just old, but ancient. It was the source, the calling card. After weeks of sleepless nights, living on my boat, guarding my secret, I took the biggest risk of my life. I found a man in Boston, a reclusive specialist in maritime antiquities whose name I got from a book my grandfather owned. He worked out of a dusty, book-lined office that smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. I didn't show him the money. I just showed him the coin. He picked it up with a pair of tweezers, his eye magnified through a jeweler's loupe. He didn't speak for a full 5 minutes. The silence was so heavy I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Finally, he put it down and looked at me, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a dry whisper. He told me the symbol, the Ouroboros serpent around the compass rose, was the mark of a private, centuries-old consortium of maritime financiers. They weren't pirates or smugglers. They were something else entirely, a shadow bank for the world's oldest fortunes, moving wealth across oceans long before nations had central banks. He said the coin wasn't just gold. It was a key, a bearer bond of unimaginable value. He made a single encrypted phone call. A week later, I was on a private jet to the Cayman Islands, my heart in my throat the entire flight. The men I met weren't thugs. They were quiet, impeccably dressed accountants and lawyers who looked at my coin with a kind of religious reverence. They asked no questions about where I found it. They simply acknowledged my recovery of a lost asset. Within a month, the first transfer was made. $10 million appeared in a newly created corporate account. It was real. The ghost had a body. I had become a king, and no one in my kingdom even knew it yet. I didn't buy a new car or a fancy watch. My first move was personal. I walked into the offices of Sterling Seafoods. Arthur Sterling was on the phone, barking orders, his polished shoes up on his mahogany desk. He saw me and waved me away dismissively like I was a fly. "Not now, Silas, I'm busy. Go see one of the dock hands if you want to sell your scraps." I didn't move. I just stood there until he finished his call, an irritated sigh escaping his lips. "What is it?" he snapped. I walked over to his desk and placed a cashier's check on it, face up. It was for $50 million. He stared at it, then at me, his face a mask of confusion. "What is this? A joke?" he asked. "That's my offer," I said, my voice calm. "I'm buying your company, all of it. The processing plant, the fleet, the docks, and this office. Especially this office." He started to laugh, a loud braying sound, but it died in his throat when he saw I wasn't smiling. He picked up the check, his hand trembling slightly. He saw the bank's name, the routing numbers. It was real. The color drained from his face. "How?" was all he could manage. "The sea gives back what it takes, Arthur," I told him. "You have 24 hours to accept. Otherwise, I'll just build a bigger, better plant right next door and put you out of business in 6 months." He accepted. I now own the company that spent a decade trying to starve me out. Arthur Sterling works for me now. He manages the inventory. I made sure his new office has a beautiful, clear view of the Folly's End, which I had fully restored and now keep moored in the best slip on the pier. It's a monument. A few weeks later, I was overseeing the offloading of a new state-of-the-art trawler I'd purchased for the fleet when I saw Marco. His boat, the Tidal Force, looked small and cheap next to mine. He approached me slowly, his confidence gone, replaced by a nervous uncertainty. He looked at my new clothes, at the way the other captains now spoke to me with deference, with respect. "Silas," he started. I heard, "I can't believe it. How did you do it?" I looked at him, the man who had publicly gutted me, who had called my legacy a coffin. I felt nothing. No anger, no desire for revenge. It was like looking at a ghost from a past life. "You were right about one thing, Marco," I said. "The Folly's End is a coffin. It's where the old Silas Croft died." He swallowed hard, seeing there was no bridge back to the man he once knew. "Look, Si, if you're hiring captains," he trailed off, the humiliation hanging in the air between us. I just shook my head. "I'm not. I have all the men I need." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing on the pier, a relic in a world that had moved on without him. He had chosen a new boat over loyalty. I had chosen to trust the sea, and the sea had rewarded me. I now live in the house on the hill overlooking Gloucester Harbor, the one Sterling used to own. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But the mystery of it all keeps me awake at night. The $300 million was just one part of a much larger, untraceable fortune. The bankers who helped me never revealed the source, only that I was now a beneficiary of the Ouroboros Trust. Was my barrel the only one? Or are there others lost in storms, waiting on the ocean floor? Why was it there in the middle of that squall, right in my path? Was it an accident or was it a test? Sometimes I take the Folly's End out alone, back to the spot where I found it. I'll cut the engine and just drift, staring down into the dark water, wondering if another secret is waiting to be offered up. I am no longer a failure, a joke, a dinosaur. I am the man who pulled a fortune from a floating coffin, but I am also the keeper of a secret I may never understand. Do you believe a turnaround like this is possible? What's your theory on where the money really came from? Share it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because the ocean is full of stories, and this one is far from over.